My name is Elizabeth Porter, and what I'm about to share with you changed my life forever. On March the 15th, 2024, I didn't just have a brush with death, I actually died for 9 minutes. During that time, Jesus Christ himself revealed to me shocking truths about prayer that I was commanded to share with the world. What I learned will shake you to your core. But before I tell you about the incredible revelations I received, I need you to understand how I got there. It was an ordinary Friday morning. I was heading to my weekly prayer group at Grace Community Church, where we'd been meeting for the past 15 years. The sun had barely risen, casting long shadows across the empty streets of our small town. I remember thinking about how blessed I was to have such a devoted group of prayer warriors in my life. Little did I know that God was about to show me something that would transform my understanding of prayer forever. I had just turned onto Mason Street when it happened. A delivery truck ran a red light, and in that split second, everything changed. The impact was devastating. I remember a brief moment of searing pain, the sound of metal crushing metal, and then everything began to slow down. In those final moments of consciousness, time seemed to stretch like taffy. I could see individual shards of glass suspended in the air around me, catching the early morning sunlight like diamonds. The airbag deployed in slow motion, a white cloud expanding before my eyes. I had the strangest thought. How beautiful it all was, this dance of destruction happening around me. Then came the darkness. But it wasn't the immediate nothingness I had expected. Instead, it was like slowly sinking into deep water. I felt myself slipping away layer by layer, each sense shutting down one at a time. First went my ability to move, then my sense of touch. The sounds around me, the crunch of metal, the blaring of horns, people's screams, became increasingly distant, as if I was listening through layers of thick cotton. The last thing to go was my vision, but before it did, I saw something extraordinary. The world around me seemed to fold in on itself, like a piece of paper being creased again and again until nothing remained but pure light. Then even that faded, and I found myself in complete darkness. But this darkness was different from anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't the absence of light. It was more like being in a space where light hadn't been invented yet. I had no sense of my body, no feeling of up or down, no concept of time passing. I existed purely as consciousness, floating in this primordial void. Then came the sound. It started as a single pure note, like a crystal wine glass being run with a wet finger. This note grew and multiplied, becoming a symphony of impossible complexity. The music, if you could call it that, seemed to contain every sound that had ever existed, or would exist, all playing in perfect harmony. It wasn't heard with ears, but rather felt through the very essence of my being. As the music reached a crescendo, I began to sense movement. I was traveling, or perhaps the space around me was moving. The darkness began to thin, like fog burning away under a morning sun. And then came the light. Oh, the light. How can I describe it to those who haven't seen it? Imagine the most perfect sunrise you've ever witnessed. Multiply its beauty by infinity, and you'll still fall short. This light was alive. It had consciousness, purpose, personality. It was both particle and wave, both energy and matter, both physical and spiritual. The light didn't just illuminate, it communicated. It loved. It knew. I found myself being drawn toward what seemed to be the source of this light, moving through what I can only describe as dimensions of reality I never knew existed. Each dimension revealed new aspects of existence that my earthly mind struggled to comprehend. I saw colors that don't exist in our physical spectrum, heard frequencies beyond any earthly sound, and understood concepts that transcended human language. As I moved through these dimensions, I began to see what looked like ribbons of energy weaving through space. These ribbons, I somehow knew, were the threads of human consciousness connecting all living souls. I could see how every thought, every prayer, every act of love or hatred sent ripples through these cosmic webs. The interconnectedness of all things became startlingly clear. How a single kind word spoken in love could create waves of positive energy that affected countless lives across time and space. Then I noticed something extraordinary happening to what I perceived as my form. I was no longer bound by physical limitations. I existed as pure consciousness, yet I also had a kind of body, a body of light that could shift and change according to my thoughts. I could expand to the size of a galaxy or contract to the smallest subatomic particle. I could perceive reality from any angle, any perspective, any point in what we call time. That's when I first became aware of the presence of others. They weren't exactly beings in any physical sense, but rather concentrations of conscious light that communicated through pure thought and emotion. These beings, I understood them to be what we would call angels, move through the dimensions with perfect grace and purpose. Their very existence was a worship, their every movement a song of praise. The angels didn't speak in words, but rather in pure concepts that bloomed directly in my consciousness. They showed me how our physical universe was just the outermost layer of an infinitely complex reality. They revealed how what we call time was actually a single, eternal moment, viewed through the lens of physical consciousness, like white light being split into a rainbow by a prism. But all of this was merely a prelude to what came next. The light began to intensify, gathering itself into a presence of such overwhelming love and power that I felt myself being completely undone. Every false thing within me, every pretense, every self-deception simply dissolved in the face of this perfect light. Yet even as I was being unmade, I was also being remade, reconstructed at the deepest level of my being. That's when I saw him. Jesus stood before me, yet stood as an inadequate word. He was simultaneously present in every possible dimension, every potential reality. His presence was the organizing principle around which all existence revolved. The light I had experienced before was merely a reflection of his glory, like moonlight compared to the sun. His appearance defied description. He was at once completely human and utterly divine. His face held all the wisdom of eternity, yet also an immediate personal love that made me feel like the only soul in creation. His eyes, how can I describe his eyes? They contained galaxies, yet focused on me with such intimate attention that I felt completely known and completely loved. "Elizabeth," he said, and his voice resonated through every level of my being. It was like hearing my name for the first time, as if he was speaking not just to me, but to the deepest truth of who I was created to be. In that moment, I understood that he had known me before time began, had loved me before the foundations of the universe were laid. I wanted to fall at his feet, but I realized I had no control over my form in his presence. Instead, my entire being naturally oriented itself toward him, like a flower turning toward the sun. Every particle of my existence responded to his presence with pure adoration. "I have brought you here," he continued, "because my church needs to understand the power of true prayer." As he spoke these words, the space around us transformed. We were suddenly surrounded by what looked like countless streams of living light, each one unique in color and intensity. "These," he explained, "are the prayers of my people throughout time." As he spoke, I could see individual prayers moving through the spiritual dimensions. Some were bright and powerful, piercing through multiple levels of reality. Others were dim, barely visible against the cosmic background. What amazed me was how even the smallest prayer had an effect, creating ripples through the spiritual realm that influenced the physical world in ways I never could have imagined. Jesus began to show me specific prayers throughout history. I saw Moses before the burning bush, his prayer creating a cascading effect through time that still influenced reality thousands of years later. I saw David in his private chambers, his psalms of praise generating waves of spiritual energy that transformed the atmosphere around him. I saw Daniel in his upper room, his prayers of faithfulness creating a fortress of spiritual protection that even the powers of darkness couldn't penetrate. But it wasn't just the great biblical figures. Jesus showed me countless unknown saints throughout history whose humble prayers had changed the course of events in profound ways. I saw an elderly woman in a tiny apartment, her prayers for her grandchildren creating shields of protection that would last for generations. I saw a young man in a prison cell, his prayers of forgiveness releasing waves of healing that transformed entire communities. What struck me most was how prayer operated on multiple dimensions simultaneously. Each prayer was like a stone thrown into a pond, creating ripples that moved both forward and backward in time, affecting both the physical and spiritual realms. I saw how prayers offered in faith created bridges between dimensions, allowing divine power to flow more freely into our physical reality. Jesus then showed me something that broke my heart. I saw how many prayers never reached their full potential because they were offered without true understanding or reverence. These prayers were like arrows shot without proper aim. They might still hit something, but they missed their intended target. "Watch closely," Jesus said, and he showed me what happened when someone prayed with complete surrender and holy reverence. The difference was stunning. These prayers were like laser beams of pure light, cutting through every dimension with incredible precision and power. They created what looked like permanent channels through which God's power could flow continuously. I saw how physical posture often reflected spiritual reality. When people prostrated themselves in prayer, it created a unique alignment in the spiritual realm, like a key fitting perfectly into a lock. This alignment allowed for maximum flow of divine power. However, Jesus was quick to show me that the physical posture was meaningless without the corresponding heart attitude. "Look deeper," he commanded, and suddenly I could see into the hearts of people as they prayed. I saw how pride, doubt, and unbelief created barriers that blocked the flow of spiritual power. But I also saw how true humility and faith created receptive vessels through which God's power could flow unhindered. Jesus then showed me something that amazed me: the interconnected nature of prayer. I saw how the prayers of believers throughout time were woven together into a magnificent tapestry. Each prayer strengthened the others, creating a network of spiritual power that spanned centuries. I saw how my own prayers were connected to those of saints who had lived hundreds of years before me, and how they would connect with prayers yet to be prayed in the future. The revelation continued as Jesus showed me different dimensions of prayer I never knew existed. I saw prayers of thanksgiving creating atmospheres of joy that dispelled darkness. I saw intercessory prayers forming protective barriers around people and places. I saw prayers of worship generating what looked like portals through which heavenly resources could flow into our world. But perhaps most importantly, Jesus showed me how prayer was meant to be a two-way communication. I saw how many believers spent all their prayer time talking, never pausing to listen. Those who did learn to listen in prayer developed a deeper sensitivity to the spiritual realm. Their prayers became more strategic, more powerful, because they were praying in alignment with God's purposes. Jesus then took me higher, showing me a perspective of earth I had never imagined. From this vantage point, I could see spiritual forces moving across the planet like weather patterns. I saw darkness gathering in some places, light breaking through in others. But what caught my attention were the points of light I now recognize as prayers. They formed a network of power that held back the encroaching darkness. This is why the enemy works so hard to discourage prayer, Jesus explained. He knows that a praying church is unstoppable. As he spoke these words, I saw how forces of darkness specifically targeted believers' prayer lives, using busyness, distraction, and doubt to keep them from this vital communion with God. Then Jesus showed me something that filled me with both awe and urgency. I saw future events unfolding, times of great darkness approaching. But I also saw how God was preparing his church for these times through a restoration of true prayer. I saw prayers being prayed now that would create strongholds of spiritual protection for times to come. The prayers being offered today, Jesus explained, are creating foundations for tomorrow's victories. I saw how every sincere prayer was like a deposit in a spiritual bank, accumulating power and authority that would be desperately needed in the times ahead. Jesus then showed me specific types of prayer that would be crucial in the coming days. I saw prayers of binding and loosing that had real authority in the spiritual realm. I saw prayers of agreement that multiplied in power as believers learned to truly pray as one. I saw prayers of proclamation that established God's purposes in the earth. But what impressed me most was seeing how simple prayers offered in faith and love could have enormous impact. I saw a child's bedtime prayer creating a shield of protection that saved lives. I saw a whispered, "Help me, Jesus," in a moment of crisis, releasing angels to intervene. I saw how no prayer offered in genuine faith was ever wasted or overlooked. As my time in this realm began to draw to a close, Jesus showed me one final vision. I saw the earth surrounded by layer upon layer of prayers, like a protective atmosphere. Each prayer added to this covering, strengthening it, preparing for the times ahead. I understood that every prayer, no matter how small it seemed, contributed to this protective barrier. Remember, Jesus said, his voice filled with both authority and love, prayer is not just a religious duty. It is the lifeline between heaven and earth, the mechanism I have chosen to release my power in the world. As he spoke, I saw how prayer was woven into the very fabric of creation, a fundamental force as real as gravity or electromagnetism. I felt myself being drawn back, but before I returned, Jesus gave me one final message. Tell my people that I am calling them back to true prayer. Tell them that their prayers are more powerful than they know. Tell them that the time is short, and they must learn to pray as never before. With those words, I began to feel a pull back toward my physical body. The return journey was like watching creation unfold in reverse. I moved back through dimensions, watching as the complexity of spiritual reality condensed back into physical form. I felt myself reconnecting with my earthly body, sensation returning slowly, like pins and needles after a limb has fallen asleep. The first physical sensation I became aware of was pain. Intense, all-encompassing pain. Then came the sounds, urgent voices, medical equipment beeping, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum. I could hear someone saying, "She's back. We've got a pulse." Opening my eyes was a struggle, like trying to lift heavy weights. The fluorescent lights of the hospital room seemed harsh and artificial after the living light I had experienced. But as my vision cleared, I saw something that brought tears to my eyes. In the corner of the room, barely visible, was what appeared to be an angel, its form shimming like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Within moments, it faded from view, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. The doctors were amazed at my recovery. They couldn't explain how I had survived without brain damage after being clinically dead for 9 minutes. The trauma surgeon later told me that they had been about to call time of death when my heart suddenly started beating again. But I knew the truth. I had been given not just a second chance at life, but a mission. What I experienced during those 9 minutes was more real than anything I had known in my physical existence. The visions Jesus showed me about prayer were not just for me. They were meant to be shared with his church. Since that day, I have dedicated my life to sharing this message. Some people are skeptical when I tell my story, and I understand their doubts. How can mere words capture the reality of what I experienced? How can human language describe things that exist beyond the physical realm? But I know what I saw. I know what Jesus showed me about the power of prayer. And I know that He is calling His church to a deeper level of prayer than ever before. The casual, rushed prayers that have become so common in our busy world will not be sufficient for the times ahead. We need to rediscover the power of true, reverent, focused prayer. This is why I'm sharing my story with you today. Jesus showed me that time is short, and His church needs to rediscover the power of reverential prayer. Will you join me in taking this message seriously? Will you commit to developing a deeper prayer life, one that moves beyond casual requests to real communion with God? The choice is yours, but I can tell you from personal experience, there is nothing more precious than encountering Jesus in that place of total surrender. When we humble ourselves before Him, heaven moves on our behalf in ways we cannot imagine. My name is Elizabeth Porter, and this is my testimony. May it inspire you to seek a deeper level of prayer and communion with our Lord Jesus Christ. The time is now. The call has been given. How will you respond? One final note. Since my experience, I've noticed that my perception of reality has been permanently altered. I sometimes catch glimpses of the spiritual realm, brief moments when the veil between dimensions seems to thin. In these moments, I can see how prayer is constantly moving and working, even when we can't see the results with our physical eyes.